We usually tell the story of the swing era through bandleaders, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Chick Webb. But there is another way to tell it, from the dance floor up. This is the story of how the dancers of the swing era shaped the bands, the arrangements, and even the sound of jazz itself. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, you didn't have swing music first and swing dancing later. They evolved in the same spaces, especially in black communities in Harlem and other urban centers. Dancers were already experimenting with jazz steps based on the Charleston and other black social dances in the 1920s. When bands started playing looser, more syncopated, riff-based jazz in the early 1930s, those dancers adapted, stretching steps into what became the Lindy Hop. More on that later. The Lindy Hop, the Big Apple, and related swing dances were not formal studio inventions. They came out of real club and ballroom floors, rent parties, Harlem ballrooms like the Savoy, and community dances, where people responded directly to bands playing live. So instead of band writes new style, people later invent dance, it was more like band changes groove, dancers try new steps, band sees what works, style evolves together. Now picture the physical space, big rooms, many bodies, loud volume and constant motion. Because of this environment, certain musical features became almost necessary. 1. Riffs as hooks for dancers. A riff is a short, repeated phrase. In swing, riffs became the backbone of many arrangements. On a packed floor, dancers can't latch onto subtle inner voice lines, but they can instantly feel a clear, repeated riff from the saxes or trumpets. Bands started building arrangements around these riffs. The result is that even if the melody is complex, the dancers always have a simple, strong, rhythmic idea to hook their movement onto. 2. Strong backbeat and clear pulse. For social dancing, timing is everything. If the groove is mushy, the floor collapses. Drummers emphasized a clear swing pulse, often with the ride pattern and hi-hat, and accented 2 and 4 so dancers could feel where to bounce. Crowded halls made this even more critical. In a packed Savoy or Roseland type room, you might not clearly hear every instrument, but you could feel the beat through the floor and the bodies around you. That pushed bands to keep the time rock solid and the backbeat obvious. 3. Shout choruses and breaks timed to the room. Shout choruses are those big last section explosions where the whole band plays powerful lines, often at the end of an arrangement. Dancers loved these moments because they could throw in aerials, big breaks, or signature moves. Arrangers learned to place shout choruses late in the tune to give the floor a payoff, a kind of last round burst that made the dance feel like it had a narrative arc. Similarly, bands used breaks, sudden stops or gaps where the rhythm drops out, for dancer interaction. A well-placed break lets dancers hit freezes, pose, or punctuate the music with kicks and dips. If a break went over well and you saw the floor nail it together, that break would stay in the chart. If it confused everyone, you adjusted or removed it. So the whole architecture of a swing arrangement, intro, chorus, riffs, solos, shout, ending, was built with the dancer's energy curve in mind. Warm-up, cruise, tension, release. The dancers responded with new steps. They invented and refined a style that came to be known as Lindy Hop in Harlem, along with related swing dances like Charleston variations, Balboa, and the Shag. Each style had its own relationship to the music. Each new musical idea sparked a move, and each new move challenged the band to keep things interesting. The conversation between stage and floor was continuous, and it ran in both directions. Lindy Hop and the Big Apple are two of the most important dances of the swing era. They were both created by black dancers, and both are tightly connected to swing music, but they look and feel very different. Let's start with Lindy Hop. Lindy Hop is the original swing partner dance. It was born in Harlem, New York around 1928, and it really exploded in the 1930s at the Savoy Ballroom. It grew out of earlier black dances like the Charleston, breakaway and tap, mixed with the structure of European partner dancing. In Lindy Hop, you dance with a partner, switching between a close embrace and an open position. The signature move is called the swing out. It's an 8-count pattern where the partners move in a sort of circular slingshot. They come in toward each other, then fly back out again, always riding the groove of the music. Lindy is very improvisational. You see kicks, swivels, turns, and sometimes aerials and flips in performance settings. It is grounded, rhythmic, and completely tied to swing jazz, especially the big band music of the 1930s and 40s. When most people say swing dancing, they're usually talking about Lindy Hop or styles that grew out of it. The Big Apple is something else. The Big Apple is not mainly a partner dance. It is a group circle dance with a leader calling out steps and everyone in the circle doing the moves together. It began in a black club in Columbia, South Carolina that was literally called the Big Apple. Dancers there used ring shout traditions and jazz steps in a big circle. White college students watched from the balcony because segregation laws meant they were not allowed to join, and then copied what they saw and took it back to white campuses. In a classic Big Apple, the caller shouts names of steps: Charleston, Susie Q, Truckin', Shag, and many other jazz moves. The whole circle changes steps on command, so the dance becomes a constantly shifting, high-energy routine. Many of those steps were already part of Harlem Lindy Hop culture. When Whitey's Lindy Hoppers heard about the Big Apple craze, Frankie Manning created his own Big Apple choreography using Lindy and jazz steps in a circular pattern. You can see that version in 1930s film clips with dancers circling, clapping and dropping into solo breaks before returning to the group. While all of this was happening on the floor, the music itself was getting more complex behind the scenes. Arrangers like Mary Lou Williams, Fletcher Henderson and Cy Oliver were writing advanced harmonies, inner voicings and intricate sectional interplay that rewarded careful listening. They were influenced by classical music, blues traditions and the earlier New Orleans and Chicago styles, but they were also watching the dancers. Mary Lou Williams, for example, wrote many of Andy Kirk's most popular pieces, including Walkin' and Swingin', Froggy Bottom and Mary's Idea. Her charts contrasted sections of the orchestra in unexpected ways, used surprising instrument groupings and still kept a clear, danceable beat underneath it all. Top band leaders like Benny Goodman, Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington asked her to prepare custom arrangements, knowing that her sense of rhythm and groove would work on the floor. Duke Ellington, too, composed with specific spaces, dancers and rooms in mind, even as he pushed into more concert-like forms. His pieces might be premiered at the Cotton Club or broadcast from theatres, where the audience sat and listened, but they still carried the swing pulse that was born in dance halls and tested by dancers' feet. The best swing music functioned on two levels at once. It satisfied dancers in the moment, giving them pulse, structure, and surprise. And it intrigued musicians and attentive listeners who paid attention to the harmonic and compositional details hiding inside the groove. Nowhere was this exchange more intense than at the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem. The Savoy opened in 1926 on Lenox Avenue and quickly earned the nickname the home of happy feet. It was huge. On a busy night, it could hold upwards of 2,000 people or more. Unlike many other venues of the time, the Savoy was integrated. Black and white dancers shared the same floor. Harlem locals, downtown visitors and out-of-towners all came to test themselves against the music and each other. The Savoy had a long springy dance floor and two bandstands facing each other. While one band finished, the other could start. The music barely stopped all night. This layout mattered. Because the floor was big and constantly full, bands had to project energy across a sea of dancers. They learned very quickly what worked and what did not. If a tempo dragged, the dancers would thin out or switch to simpler steps. If a riff was too busy, you would see confusion instead of smiles. If a break was perfectly placed, the whole room could hit a stop together, then explode back into motion. The house band that defined this environment was the orchestra of Chick Webb. His band became the main attraction at the Savoy in the 1930s. Night after night, Webb's orchestra played for dancers who expected nothing less than perfection. The band's arrangements were tight, full of sharp ensemble lines and powerful shout choruses. Webb's drumming was explosive but controlled, driving the band and the dancers without ever losing the beat. You can still hear this on recordings like Stompin' at the Savoy and Liza. The partnership between Webb and the dancers was so close that the Savoy became a training ground for both sides. The best dancers, including the legendary group known as Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, pushed the band to keep raising the bar. In turn, the band created arrangements that accentuated aerials, breaks, and rhythmic shifts that dancers wanted to showcase. One of the most dramatic expressions of this relationship was the Battle of the Bands. On certain nights, the Savoy would host two major bands on its twin stages. They would alternate sets, trading blows in front of the same crowd. Dancers served as the judges. They voted with their feet. In 1937, Chick Webb's band faced off against Benny Goodman's orchestra at the Savoy. Goodman was already being called the King of Swing and was a national radio star. But this was Webb's home turf. As the story is often told, Goodman's band played well, but Webb's more intensely swinging rhythms and direct connection with the Lindy Hoppers carried the night. In the eyes of many Harlem dancers, Chick Webb remained the real king of that floor. A similar aura surrounded Count Basie's band when it came through from Kansas City. Basie's lighter, riff-based style was perfect for dancers. It gave them space to improvise and ride the groove. When Basie's band played the Savoy, dancers went wild. The response confirmed that this stripped-down, bluesy approach could work not just in Kansas City, but in New York and beyond. Battles like these were more than entertainment. They were experiments. They showed bands which styles travelled and which fell flat. And because dancers reacted instantly, the feedback was brutal and honest. Across the country, similar scenes played out in other venues. In Los Angeles, the Palomar Ballroom, already a popular dance hall, became legendary when Benny Goodman opened a residency there in 1935. But swing dancing was not limited to the Savoy and the Palomar. Throughout the 1930s and early 40s, cities around the United States developed their own scenes and their own styles. In California, dancers in crowded ballrooms evolved Balboa, characterized by a close embrace and subtle, almost invisible footwork, perfect for very fast tempos and tight spaces where a big swing out would knock someone's drink over. On the East Coast, jitterbug became a catch-all term used by the media to describe high-energy swing dancing, though in reality, jitterbug was more of a family of dances, Lindy Hop, collegiate shag, and others rather than a single fixed style. These regional variations fed back into the music in practical ways. Bands that toured discovered that certain tempos worked better in some cities than others. In smaller venues with less room to move, they might favour smoother, medium tempos or arrangements that invited more subtle footwork. In big halls with seasoned dancers, they could push into the upper tempo ranges, 200 beats per minute and beyond, and still keep the floor packed and engaged. As swing spread, so did the idea that a band's success could be measured by the size and energy of its dancing crowd. Radio airplay mattered. Record sales mattered. But if you walked into a hall and saw a thin, tired dance floor, you knew something was wrong, no matter how impressive the arrangement sounded on paper. By the late 1940s, the landscape began to change. Several forces converged at once. World War II disrupted touring routes, drafted musicians, and made running a large band far more expensive. A musicians' union recording ban limited new records for a stretch of critical years, and new styles, most notably bebop, emerged out of late-night jam sessions in small clubs where listening, not dancing, was the point. Some younger musicians felt that swing had become too commercial and that dancers, club owners, and record labels had too much control over the creative direction of jazz. They pushed for a more complex, faster, and harmonically adventurous style that could only be fully appreciated by sitting down and paying close attention. At the same time, social dance itself did not disappear. People still danced in clubs and at parties. But the central place of swing dancing in mainstream American youth culture began to fade, especially as rhythm and blues and, later, rock and roll rose up to claim the next generation. Yet even as the swing era ended, its core logic survived. Rhythm and blues bands in the late 40s and 50s, early rock and roll groups, and later funk and soul acts all inherited the basic idea that you judge a band by the floor in front of it. If the crowd is moving, the music is doing its job. If they are standing still, something needs to change. That is the same feedback loop that once tied Lindy Hoppers to Chick Webb's drum breaks, Balboa dancers to tight California combos, and jitterbug kids to blasting horn sections in ballrooms across the country. The story could have ended there, as a nostalgic memory of an era of big bands and huge ballrooms, but it did not. Starting in the late 20th century, a global swing revival began. Dancers and musicians in cities around the world rediscovered Lindy Hop and other swing dances by studying old film clips, interviews, and original recordings. They paid close attention to the original context: black communities in Harlem, the realities of segregation, and the politics of race and class that operated behind the glamorous images. They acknowledged that swing dancing was not just a quirky vintage hobby or a costume party. It was a black vernacular dance form deeply tied to the experiences, the creativity, and the resilience of African Americans in the early 20th century. Modern swing scenes today still replicate the old feedback loop. DJs and live bands watch the floor carefully. If a song is too fast or too slow, too busy or too flat, the energy drops and you feel it immediately. When the groove is right, you see it in the way the room breathes together, the way strangers smile at each other mid-step. Workshops, festivals, and competitions from New York to Stockholm to Seoul feature live bands that specialize in recreating, and sometimes expanding, classic swing charts. Dancers bring their own contemporary influences, mixing hip-hop, house, and other movement vocabularies into traditional steps. New technology adds yet another layer. Producers sample classic swing recordings into electronic tracks, creating electro-swing hybrids that show up in clubs, video games, and film soundtracks. Once again, dancers are testing those sounds in real time. Once again, the floor is shaping the music. When we look back at the swing era through this lens, we realize the story is not just about famous names on record labels. It is about an ecosystem. Band leaders and arrangers writing charts with specific rooms and specific dancers in mind. Club owners balancing business pressures with artistic ambition. Radio shows bringing the sound of distant ballrooms into living rooms across the country. And crucially, thousands of ordinary people who spent their nights learning steps, improvising moves, and literally wearing down wooden floors with their feet. The dancers were not passive consumers of entertainment. They were active collaborators in the creation of a musical style. They told the bands what tempos felt good in their bodies. They proved which riffs really swung and which only sounded good on paper. They demanded breaks and shout choruses that gave them space to express joy, tension, and release. Every time they flooded the floor for a particular tune, they cast a vote for the future of that style. Every time they stayed in their seats, they sent a quiet but powerful message in the other direction. In that sense, the swing era was a conversation, a rhythmic, sweaty, exhilarating conversation between stage and floor. The bands shaped the dancers, and the dancers shaped the bands. If you want to understand why those old recordings still feel alive, even through cheap speakers and digital compression, Do not imagine them as museum pieces behind glass. Imagine them as snapshots of crowded rooms, partners turning, feet hitting wood on 2 and 4, because that is where swing was born, not only in the minds of brilliant arrangers and virtuoso soloists, but in the space between a bandstand and a dance floor, where music and motion became the same thing.